Welcome to the Essence of Liberty podcast. This is the horsemanship podcast where we discuss all things liberty to help you understand, connect, communicate, and play with your horse in a gentle, subtle, and force-free way. We'll get a bit nerdy about equine psychology and learning theory to understand the science behind it all. And we'll also dive into how to motivate your horse, ways to strengthen your relationship, solving those common problems, and how to use liberty as a way to build your horse up physically, mentally, and emotionally, all in half an hour or less. I'm Dr. Nadine Lindblom, former equine veterinarian, and I'd like to invite you to join me on this journey as a student of the horse. Whether you are intentionally training your horse or not, your horse is constantly learning. So whether you're a professional horse trainer or someone that just likes to have their horse for companionship and enjoyment, you are a horse trainer. Your horse doesn't understand the difference between now we are training and now we are not. So your horse is constantly creating new associations or strengthening current associations or breaking down associations that are no longer serving a good purpose. So because of this, it is absolutely vital for you to have at least a little bit of an understanding of how your horse learns so that you can use that to your advantage, and you can also use it to ensure that you're not accidentally teaching your horse the wrong thing. Because that's how a lot of undesirable behaviors come about, is that they are handled by someone that isn't completely aware of this way of learning, and they're accidentally reinforcing those behaviors. This is something that I think should be mandatory for anyone that has a horse to know. So if you take anything away from this podcast series, then make it this one. Now, learning theory, or how humans and animals learn, is a very big topic, but a massive component of it is what is termed operant conditioning. Now, if you haven't heard that term before, good, because this is going to be insanely valuable for you to know, but also it's not as complicated as it sounds. Operant conditioning is made up of 4 components. So we have positive and negative reinforcement and positive and negative punishment. So those are 4 different quadrants of operant conditioning. Now, it's a common misconception that positive and negative refers to good and bad, but it's actually referring to adding something and subtracting something. So again, we have positive and negative reinforcement and positive and negative punishment. Reinforcement means to cause a behavior to happen more frequently. So if you're reinforcing a behavior, you are causing that behavior to happen more frequently. Punishment is causing a behavior to happen less frequently. So you're punishing a behavior to stop it from happening. So let's start by talking about positive reinforcement. That's probably the one that is most familiar to most of us. So positive reinforcement is that you're adding something pleasant in order to reinforce a behavior. So, for example, you give your horse a food reward for doing something good, or you give them a scratch because they did something good. Those are pleasant things that is going to cause your horse to try that behavior again to see if he can get the same reward. In human terms, if you get $50 for doing a particular thing, you're going to be like, oh, that's great. I'm going to do that thing again in order to hopefully earn that reward again. In the brain, what happens when you get an unexpected reward is that there's a little release of dopamine in the reward centers of the brain. And the dopamine makes you feel really good. And that good feeling is what then causes you to want to repeat the behavior. The thing to remember, though, is that it is the horse or the learner in the situation that chooses what qualifies as a reward. As humans, we often want to use like vocal praise, good boy, good girl, well done, as a form of reward, or we want to use pats, like slaps on the neck, as a form of reward. And the reason why that seems to work sometimes is because it's actually associated with something else. There is no reason for a horse to think that a pat on the neck is pleasant, just like a slap, slap, slap on the neck. And there's also no reason for a horse to think that good boy, good girl is pleasant for them. Those things are associated with something else. So they're either associated with something good, that every time you say good boy, you stop and you give them a break and you give them a scratch on the wither. And that way they've associated that when you say that thing, they are about to get a reward, or that they're getting closer to a reward. Where this can go wrong, if you are not aware of this way of learning, is, for example, when you give your horse treats. Every time you give your horse a treat, you are reinforcing something. And that's really important to keep in mind, because the common misconception with using food rewards with horses is that it causes mugging behavior or pushing behavior. And mugging and pushing behavior is very normal behavior for a horse. We put those labels on those behaviors, but it's actually just natural behavior of a horse that smells food and is going towards the food. The horse is not intending to be mugging you, it's just doing what a horse does. But if you then look at that behavior initially and go, oh, you're so cute, you want a treat, and you give the horse a treat, you're going to reinforce that behavior and your horse is going to mug you more and more. So hopefully that makes it clear how, if you don't understand how positive reinforcement works and the fact that horses are learning all the time in this way and in the other ways that we're about to talk about, how you can potentially teach the wrong behavior by giving the food reward at the wrong time. So instead, if you're giving your horse a treat, if you just wait a moment for them to look away from you or to give you a little bit of space or just to stop that behavior for a moment, and then give them the food reward, guess what they're going to try more of? They're going to try to give you space. They're going to try to move their head away from you because they know that that's the behavior that unlocks the food reward. So if you want to give your horse a treat just out of love, which of course there's nothing wrong with at all, if you make sure that you give that treat at the right time when your horse is doing something that you actually prefer, then you're going to be able to use that quadrant of positive reinforcement to your advantage. So the next quadrant that we have is negative reinforcement, and this is what is commonly known as pressure and release in the horse world. So the way negative reinforcement works is that you apply something that the horse perceives as a little bit uncomfortable or even painful, and then when he does the thing that you're asking him to do, you then take that thing away. You take the uncomfortable thing away or the bad thing away. And the moment that that thing is taken away, that behavior that was happening at that exact time is going to be reinforced. So an example of this would be when you're riding and you want your horse to stop. So you close your hands around the reins and put a little bit of pressure on the bit. And then when the horse stops, you release the pressure. Or if you're asking him to go forwards and you put a little bit of pressure on his sides, and then when he goes forwards, you release that pressure. So it's the release that's going to reinforce the behavior. And it's really important to understand that it's not the pressure itself that teaches the horse what to do. It's actually the release of that pressure. A human example of this is when you're driving and you don't have your seatbelt on and your car is beeping at you really irritatingly for you to put your seatbelt on. And then you might just be going down the driveway. You're not actually going anywhere, but you put your seatbelt on because you can't stand the beeping. So the beeping is an aversive towards you because you find it really irritating. You find it really annoying, mentally aversive. So you are going to put your seatbelt on in order to stop that from beeping. And the moment you put your seatbelt on, the beeping stops, and that's reinforcing your behavior. And negative reinforcement is the mainstream in the equestrian world. It is what most horsemanship methods are based on. And the reason why this is such a popular way of training horses is because it's extremely effective. And the reason why it's effective is, one, because horses are flight animals, so they are extremely perceptive of their environment and anything that could be causing them danger or could be a threat to them. They're hyper aware of those sorts of things, and they're always seeking safety and comfort from those things. And the second reason is that they are extremely conflict avoidant. So when they are presented with something that could be a threat to them, if they cannot run away from it, they will fawn. So fawn is a word that means to please or to do something for someone in an act of submission in order to lower their aggression or intimidation towards you. Humans do it too. If you are faced with someone that is very intimidating to you, you might break eye contact, or you might just do what you're told just so that this other person doesn't become aggressive towards you. And horses are very, very good at that. And we have this saying in the horsemanship world, which is that the horses are willing to please. And yeah, they are willing to please, but it's not from the goodness of their hearts most of the time. It is in order to avoid a threat, in order to lower our intimidation towards them. So if you are not aware of the fact that horses learn in this way, it's very easy to accidentally teach them the wrong thing. So an example of this is when you are, let's say you're loading your horse on a trailer and your horse refuses to go on. So you put a little bit of pressure on the lead for him to go up the ramp, and he refuses and he kind of pulls back so that he is sideways now and he's not straight. So what you do is you release the pressure of the lead rope and you turn him away from the float, and then you walk him back up in order to straighten him so he can go straight into the float, because you don't want him to walk up on an angle. And that's completely fair. But how the horse experiences that is, okay, I'm a bit uncomfortable by the float. The float in itself is an aversive to me. Then you're putting pressure on the lead, and that is also aversive because there's pressure on the head. So when I then pull against that pressure and move my body a little bit towards an angle, you're going to release the discomfort on my head and you're going to turn me away from the float. And I'm going to get that massive relief from my head and from the float because you then walk me away from the float. So instead of teaching him to go on the float, you have effectively reinforced for him to pull against you when you line him up to the float. And then you'll find that that behavior is going to get stronger and stronger because he gets the release every time he behaves in that way. So if you tweak that ever so slightly by continuing to ask him to come forward towards the trailer and up onto the ramp, and he gives you a little bit of a try. He might put his foot up on the ramp, or he might follow that feel of the halter a little bit. If you in that moment release the pressure on the head and turn him away from the float, you're going to reinforce that moment where he was actually coming forward towards the float. And that is what you want to reinforce. You don't want to reinforce him pulling against you and trying to pull away from the float. If you're going to walk him away from the float to straighten him up or to take a break or something like that, you want to pick your moment really wisely by picking a moment when he's actually coming forward, because that is the behavior that you want to reinforce. So having a little bit of knowledge around how horses learn in this way and tweaking what you're doing ever so slightly is going to make a massive difference to everything that you do with your horse. So even if you don't want to rely completely on this type of method, if you're moving away from that and, for example, going more towards positive reinforcement, it's still really important to know this, because whether we're using it intentionally or not, horses are still learning in this way. So if you're using positive reinforcement and you are leading your horse with a halter, if you take the pressure off the halter when your horse is pulling against it, that's still what he's going to learn. So having this in the back of your mind, that this is how horses learn really effectively, then when you are working with your horse, you're handling him or you're doing anything with your horse, you can still make sure that you're releasing the pressure at a time that is going to teach him the thing that you want him to learn or the thing that you want him to do. Another quick example of this is when you're picking up his feet. If you put his foot down when he is starting to move away from you, then you're going to teach him that he just needs to start to move away from you, and you're going to put his foot down. If you just hold for a moment and wait for him to have a moment of stillness and then put his foot down, he's going to learn that a moment of stillness will get him his foot back. And we don't have to be really crazy about this and, hang on to his leg while he is having a panic attack. It's just the little things. Like if I'm picking out the hoof and my horse fidgets a little bit or wriggles for a moment, maybe there's a fly or maybe there's something that bothered him, I'm just going to wait to put his foot down when he is still rather than when he is fidgeting. It's just the little things like that that make a massive difference. The next quadrant that we have is positive punishment, remembering that positive refers to adding something rather than something that is positive as in a good thing. So adding something in order to decrease the frequency of a behavior. A classic example of this would be if you have a show jumping horse and the horse refuses a jump and the rider then stings the horse with the whip a couple of times in order to punish that horse for refusing the jump. Another example is if a horse tries to bite and you respond to that by hitting the horse or slapping him on the neck or slapping him on the face, then that is also an example of positive punishment. Now remember, as I'm giving you these examples, I'm not saying this is what I would do, it's just common examples that you will see in the horse world. Another example of positive punishment is an electric fence. So the horse, when he touches the electric fence, then he gets zapped. So you're adding something to decrease the behavior of touching the fence or leaning on the fence or trying to go across the fence by adding something that the horse feels is aversive. Positive punishment can also be used accidentally in the wrong way to teach your horse something that you don't necessarily want, just like the other quadrants. So an example of this would be if you are lining your horse up to the mounting block and perhaps he perceives being ridden as stressful or hard work or even painful if he has an ill-fitting saddle, for example. And then if you take him up to the mounting block and you straight away jump on him as soon as he's standing still, then he's going to realize that, oh, when I stand still next to the mounting block, I'm going to get ridden, or you're going to get on me. And if he perceives that as something bad, then that can act as a positive punishment for him lining up to the mounting block. So the way to tweak that situation a little bit would be to ask him to line up to the mounting block and then make that position there quite nice for him for a little while. He might get some scratches, he might get a food reward, and then when you get on, he might get some scratches and a food reward as well. And that way you're using positive reinforcement to show him that when you line up to the mounting block, you actually get something good. And using this mounting block example as well, you have to make sure that your horse is not in pain, or it's good to address the reason why he doesn't want to be ridden in the first place, of course. So you need to make sure that your saddle is fitting and that he doesn't perceive the riding aspect as something that is terribly aversive, because you don't want to band-aid that by teaching him to. It's very valuable communication from the horse if he doesn't want to line up to the mounting block, but it's a good example of how positive punishment can be accidentally used to then decrease the frequency of the behavior of lining up to the mounting block. The last quadrant that we have is negative punishment. So negative being subtraction in order to decrease the frequency of a behavior. So in this example, or in this category, you are taking something away from the horse that the horse likes in order to decrease the frequency of a behavior. So in humans or in children, it is comparable to saying, if you keep behaving that way, I'm going to take away your toys. That is a form of negative punishment because you're taking something away in order to decrease the frequency of that behavior. And people often try to use this quite incorrectly in the horse world by, for example, when the horse is not behaving as desired when he's being ridden, if he is suddenly bucking or rearing or not doing what the rider would like, they say, well, you didn't behave during your session, so I'm going to take away your food, or I'm not going to feed you tonight. In this way, they are trying to use negative punishment as a way to train the horse. However, horses just don't understand that form of logic, and there is way too long of a time between the punishment and the behavior in order for the horse to be able to make that association. Because horses only have like a 2-3 second association time. So when it comes to all these quadrants, the reinforcer or the punishment has to happen almost at the time of the behavior or immediately after. So negative punishment is one that is a little bit more sort of tricky to use with horses, because for the most part it requires an element of logic in order to understand why it is happening. However, a situation where this can sort of come into effect is if you're using positive reinforcement. Then if you suddenly leave the session, or if you end the session, because the horse is generally quite interested in and they want to continue training, if you suddenly pack up and leave, that can act as a negative punishment. It may not be something that you're intending, but for that reason, it's very important that we're ending the sessions very strategically so that the horse doesn't feel like you're taking something away from him when he has done what you have asked him to do. Another example when this could be used potentially quite effectively is if you're using positive reinforcement and the horse does something that you don't desire and you don't want to use negative reinforcement or positive punishment, is that you can do like a timeout where you turn away from the horse for a few seconds and I mean, almost ignore him for a little while. I'm not saying this is what I do, but it has been shown in some studies to be effective. So you turn out, you do a bit of a timeout. You say, oh, well, you did that behavior, so it's a timeout for 10 seconds, 30 seconds before we recommence the session. So that's an example of negative punishment. So that is a very brief and quick explanation of the 4 quadrants in operant conditioning, and it is really good to have at least a basic understanding of them because you are using them whether you like it or not. So it's good to be able to use them in a very effective way. I like to base my training mainly on positive reinforcement as the motivator. So I like my horses to always be seeking towards a reward and to be trying to figure out how to gain their reward. And then I will use gentle guidance in order to guide them towards what will unlock their reward. So help them find the answer by guiding them very gently and very subtly. And when the motivation is stemming from them working towards a reward, you generally don't have to be very loud with your body language at all. You don't have to be really obvious and clear or to make anything happen because they know that your guidance is going to help them find their reward. And that's what's really cool with this is that you can be really gentle and really subtle and communicate with them in a way where they feel really comfortable because you're not threatening or intimidating. So I really, really like this way of working because I don't have to intimidate my horses into doing anything. The motivation is stemming from the positive reinforcement. So I hope that helps you a little bit in your day-to-day interactions with your horse because no matter what discipline that you do, whether it's dressage or show jumping, eventing, if you do liberty or if you do a little bit of everything, the way your horse learns doesn't change. So you can apply this to everything, and it is actually already being applied to everything. It's just a matter of being strategic and skilled in the way that you are using it. And that is all that I have for you in today's episode. Thank you for staying until the very end. I really appreciate that. If you're enjoying this podcast, then you might love the free masterclass that I have available on my website about how to begin liberty with your horse. And for those of you that want to dive really deep, the Essence of Liberty Online Academy is now open for enrollments. The Academy is basically this podcast, but on steroids with like 30 plus hours of video content. And you follow 3 different horses that were specifically chosen because they have very different personalities and very different histories, and they've never done Liberty before. And you watch them in their first 13 sessions of Liberty. Then there's also heaps of theory to understand the science behind all the methods that you're using. And you get access to the Facebook community group where you can ask your questions and share your progress with your horse at home. So I really hope to see you in the Academy soon. But with that, I will leave you to enjoy the rest of your week. I hope you get some time to spend with your horses, and remember, stay curious, stay compassionate, and keep exploring the possibilities of liberty with your horse. I'll see you in the next one.